So yeah, do we think it helps size training? So my thoughts on it. So obviously, getting bigger will help your strength outcomes, but I might even like subcategorize it to more of that neurological side of things. So for the audience, that might mean, you're good at moving heavy weights. You recruit your high threshold motor units, all the muscle fibers contract, and they contract hard, and they contract with a degree of velocity and speed. You're good at the movement. You're well practiced at it. Doing that has a few characteristics of it. It means when you come back to size training, you can now recruit these muscles quickly, efficiently, and aggressively. So let's say you're doing a set of 8 on your size training. That neurological thing would basically mean I grabbed as many fibers as I could because I needed to. Now when you're trying to do the hypertrophy, you're training more fibers. You're training everything there to a degree. Obviously if you change the lifts, certain things change, but in terms of the adaptations there. Another thing is, if you're doing neurological stuff like that, one of the magic things is if you don't do stuff for a while, you get resensitized. What that means is you can benefit at lower thresholds. So basically, if you need to do like a bunch of metabolic work, okay, like a bunch of sets, high reps, really push yourself beforehand to see a response, doing neurological stuff where you're not doing that can maintain the muscle mass, but when you come back to that, you don't need to do as much, just like a newbie lifter wouldn't need to do as much. So you get that benefit too of resensitization, and then it transfers over. So you're more efficient, you can grab more, you can do this and that. You can often improve technique there as well. But then when you come back to that, you also get the new sensitive stimulus that you can progress higher and higher and higher. Because if you're going to progress from 15 to 20 sets to 25, you're probably already trading potentially at that stage anyway, versus you've got many gaps of just improving, more work potentially, and I'm still not overtraining. That makes sense?
Very nice.
Thank you. All right, so next question was, what are some of the con sides of doing strength training for hypertrophy? Do you guys have any thoughts there? Why don't
you go first?
Me? I was just speaking like for ages. I can give it a crack though.
Uno reverse.
Right. Again, the main factor for like injury and stuff like that is potentially overuse and bad technique. But in its nature, it seems that powerlifters, for example, get twice the amount of injuries that bodybuilders get. So there is a degree of inherent danger that is there at higher intensities. Basically, you got less of a gap there potentially. Another factor is that each bit of powerlifting training, as much as I was saying about resensitizing and not doing stuff for a while, each part of your non-size training is not giving you size. So there's a degree if you potentiate for other things, but you're also not catalyzing on the one thing you want at a time. And that's just usually an issue of this variation in general. But so what that might mean is you're basically doing stuff that's just not going to progress you forward. So that training itself, it's just time taken away of your calendar year that you could be gaining size. That makes sense. So we've got the injury factors. We've got the fact that something called the stimulus to fatigue ratio. So how much like hypertrophy on the side of things we'll refer to for this one, adaptations you get versus how fatiguing they are, is usually at a bit of a disconnect. Like you might notice you just feel wiped after like a hard deadlift. Like how much does like a hard set deadlifts potentially gas you out versus just doing multiple, potentially more effective, more isolated lifts on other things that you can usually recover from? That's because the systemic demands, basically how it affects your whole systems in general, can be quite hard. And then the issue with like that in itself is the more time you're more systemically tired, fatigued, all those things, the less you can recover from all the peripheral little muscles. So if you're overall just cooked in a general sense, then you're not going to be able to do as much effort in the gym because you're cooked, but then you actually can't recover as much from your bicep curls and the rest outside of the gym. So there is a few things that come to mind. I'm sure there's more for why it can hurt it. Another thing actually, I'll quickly add, often when we're trying to gain size, we're trying to put the most amount of stress on the muscle tissues that we can. So you're really trying to bias, like for example, you're trying to squat for quads, you're really trying to put as much tension and the rest through your quads and arguably less amounts to your other muscles or the hip extensors and less of your ligaments and tendons from the knee, for example. But when you're training for for strength, potentially you'll use a rebound or something like that, which is like a loss of tension, or you're trying to distribute the weight across multiple areas, which at that stage you're like, okay, is it enough quad to really, get you to gain size in terms of the tension there? Maybe, kind of depends where you're at. Is there enough for glutes and lower back? Yeah, kind of depends where you're at. But as you're more advanced, it's probably just not enough per individual thing. I mean, it can help, but how much would it help versus a more quad-based dominant thing versus, what's the maximum amount I can lift? Because part of that lift is using momentum to a degree, safely. And a bunch of other things that isn't just recruit the most amount of attention on the tissue and stress on the tissue. Arguably, we're trying to only place as much stress on the tissue as we need. Make sense?
Sensible?
Sensible. Thank you for watching the Forge podcast. If you enjoyed it, we'd love for you to subscribe. If you want to find out more about us, check the description. And as always, thank you for listening.